Marcus, you are now live.
Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this meeting of the Cwmtaf Morgannwg University Health Board. This is our first live broadcast, so we're all hoping that it goes smoothly. Due to the continuing restrictions in respect of public gatherings and essential travel, we are, as I say, broadcasting the meeting this morning live. So hopefully everybody with access to the internet can observe the meeting in real time if they wish to do so. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome, therefore, to everybody who is watching in this morning. This is the first time we've broadcast like this, so it's a bit of an experiment, and as I say, we all hope it goes smoothly. So before we start the formal business of the meeting today, I want to extend a particular thank you, as on every occasion we do, to our staff, to our communities, and to everybody who has been working way beyond what would normally be expected to deal with this pandemic situation. It's been a huge trial for the health service and for all our partner organisations, and of course it continues because the coronavirus is still present and circulating in the communities. But a particular thank you to everybody who is still working way beyond what would normally be required and providing fantastic services to our communities. This has been a very difficult and very tragic occasion for many people who've been affected personally by COVID, but the situation would have been far worse without those efforts from staff. And I want particularly to pay tribute to our Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff who have been particularly hard affected by this crisis, and we'll be discussing a bit more of that during the course of today's meeting. So colleagues, as you will be aware, we've introduced a new process during this crisis, the consent agenda. So what we have done is to invite questions from board members in advance and ensure that each of those has been answered in advance too, so that people can assess whether they are content with the answers. So we have the agenda divided into two this morning, the consent agenda and the main agenda. I'm not going to go through the consent agenda in detail unless specifically people wish to move items from the consent section to the main section. All of the answers will be published so that everybody can see what the answers were and any debate that followed from that. So thank you. Moving then to the agenda. Apologies for absence is the first item. I'm aware of two from Liz Wilkinson and Suzanne Scott Thomas. Are there any other apologies for absence that should be noted? No, thank you very much. Moving on then, declaration of interest. Can I ask colleagues, does anybody have any interest to declare in relation to any item on today's agenda? I'll pause to give a chance for people to respond. No, good, thank you very much. So we move to the consent agenda, item 2. So to ensure, as I say, that we focus on business critical activities at this particular time, we have the consent agenda. I assume that everybody has had an opportunity to read all of the papers and to ask any questions they wish to, and that those questions have been answered and that you've seen the answers and have had a chance to consider those answers to make sure that you think they are satisfactory. So can I just ask colleagues, are there any issues that anyone would wish to move now from the consent agenda to the main agenda so that we can ensure that we have a detailed discussion on it today? Again, I'll pause to give everybody an opportunity if they wish. No, I think that's okay. So I propose, therefore, that we are all happy to approve the items and to move to the main agenda. Thank you. So we move on then to agenda item 3, 3.1, the matters arising from the action log, we'll consider those at our meeting, our regular meeting next month. So we move on then to the first substantive item on today's agenda, which is a very important and indeed seminal moment, I think, in our debate, which is the item 4.1, which is the future of the emergency department at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. And before asking Nick just to join, can I just note on behalf of the board and thank all those people who have taken the trouble to write into us, to have many meetings with us over the recent past and also over the last several months. Particular gratitude to the Save Royal Glamorgan A&E campaign for all of their hard work, all our conversations with our MSs, MPs and all the rest. And we've had a number of letters just in the last few days, all of which have been circulated to board members so that everybody understands the opinions and the strength of feeling that's being expressed. And also a particular thank you to the campaign group and the petition, the huge petition which has been signed by many thousands of people across our communities, which was presented to the board on Thursday last week. So thank you to everybody for all of that and that huge contribution that we've had. And as I think you'll see from Nick's presentation now, all of those representations have been taken very seriously on board. So thank you. I'll hand over now to Dr. Nick Lyons, who is the Executive Medical Director of the Health Board. Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I'll just remind us that the key recommendation in the paper that you, I suspect, all would have read is to approve commitment to a 24/7 consultant-led emergency department at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. I thought it might be useful if I briefly summarise the work that's informed that recommendation and then perhaps come back to the other points the board is asked to approve. The board will need no reminder at all that the reasons for examining options has been due to the very real concerns about safety and sustainability of care in the emergency department. And those concerns have related primarily to difficulties in medical staffing. Those concerns aren't new, and indeed it was those very same concerns that led to plans in 2014 for the downgrading of the department to a 24/7 minor injuries unit as a part of the South Wales programme. Those plans for the MIU were never progressed, but the subsequent uncertainty, I think it's fair to say, has hampered recruitment. And despite the really fantastic commitment of the staff in the department, it's led to the numbers of doctors dwindling in the intervening 6 years. Last autumn, the board approved the establishment of a project to determine the future of the department, as safety concerns had significantly increased and medical staff numbers had reached a critical point, culminating in the resignation of the last remaining consultant. The board will recall that we looked at two options. Option A, which was to proceed with the 2014 model of a 24/7 minor injuries unit, and option B, a reduction in the overnight model of care in the department at the Royal Glamorgan. As well as looking to see whether we could strengthen and ensure the sustainability of the department, leaving no stone unturned. A huge amount of work has taken place since then to examine those options, whilst at the same time putting that renewed effort to establish the feasibility of the 24/7 model of care. And I'm very pleased to be able to bring to the board today's recommendations. So what's led to this position today? There's been progress in medical recruitment and leadership capacity in the ED department. There's been a detailed analysis of those options A and option B. Crucially for me, listening to the local population, and as I promised we would, in sometimes quite difficult public meetings, using the real life experiences that we heard to test and inform our options and our models of care. And lastly for me, despite the many tragedies and difficulties of the COVID crisis, it has enabled us to start to develop new models of care and demonstrate that there is a potential to take pressure off the emergency department and bring care for minor injuries and minor illness closer to home. So briefly, the details in the paper, and then I'm happy to take any questions. We've seen early but very significant recruitment in consultant and middle grade doctors. We now have 2.4 full-time equivalent consultants in the Royal Glamorgan Emergency Department. We have further consultant capacity to lead the development of minor injuries and minor illness service in our community hospitals, with particular initial focus at Ysbyty Cymronda. And last Friday, we had further successful consultant recruitment. Also, hugely reassuringly, we now have 7 middle grade substantive doctors. These are the backbone of delivery of care in the department, working at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. We've had strengthening of the multidisciplinary leadership team with a new medical lead, and that really has led to renewed focus on the rota, with tangible improvements in team working. So when I was in the hospital a couple of weeks ago, consultants from other specialties said they really noticed a difference. They recognised the doctors working in the department, and there was a real feeling of teamwork. And for me, that teamwork is absolutely essential to delivery of safe care. There's been closer working between the 3 emergency departments, and the increased pressure on the ED departments has significantly, we've seen some reductions during the COVID crisis, and this has been hugely informing in terms of helping us think through what future models of care might be. We've also done detailed analysis and realised that our other 2 hospitals, the Princess of Wales and the Prince Charles Hospital, would really struggle to cope with the flow of patients were we to adopt the 24/7 MIU in particular. But for me, it has been that humbling experience of engagement with the public, listening to concerns about access and the need for care closer to their communities, that's also informed our recommendation. In summary, therefore, the safety concerns have significantly diminished due to that progress in recruitment and due to the appointment of new leadership teams. And I'm sure the board would wish to join me in thanking the teams for their incredible hard work and the commitment to make this happen, because it has indeed been hard work. Options A and options B can therefore no longer be considered in the recommendations to be viable options for the reasons I've just summarised. But the board is asked to note that there's a huge amount of further work needed to consolidate that work and to ensure the long-term sustainability of the department. Therefore, the board is asked to approve, as well as a commitment to that 24/7 delivery with a consultant-led care, so the continuation of work to provide detailed staffing models for emergency medicine, the development of minor injuries and minor illness services across the health board, but in particular in the Rhondda Taff Ely locality. We are asked to approve the development of the models of service provision in other specialties to support the 24/7 ED, and we've seen huge progress in that during the COVID crisis, of teams have worked together as they never have before. Very importantly for me, the establishment of a partnership panel to support design, development and implementation, particularly of the models of minor injury and minor illness service, so that we can get those absolutely right for the population, so that they are understood by the population and crucially used by the local populations, therefore taking the pressure off our ED departments. And lastly, the development of contingency plans, so that if we ever do experience short-term staffing issues that raised concerns about safety within the department, we had a clear managed escalation and decision making about what we would do in response to those short-term staffing issues. Lastly, Chair, before inviting any questions, I would like to thank the project team, our hard-pressed and committed clinical teams, and the local community for all the huge amount of work, the passion, the enthusiasm and the detailed analysis in the work that's led to today's recommendations. Thank you.
Nick, thank you very much for that, and I'm sure, as you say, the board would wish to join you in thanking all those who've put in so much hard work over the last 6 months or so to bring us to the point we are in today. As you say, our objective all along has been to ensure that we have for our communities a safe, high quality, accessible service for everybody, so that it doesn't matter where you live, that you will still receive the most appropriate care for you, and this paper today is designed to achieve that. But the decision for the board is to make sure that we are content with the arguments, the work that's been done, and then we have 6 elements to the recommendation to consider. Now, I know colleagues, a number of colleagues are wishing to come in and ask questions, so I'll try and take people in the order in which they've indicated, and I'm going to start first of all with Phil White.
Thank you, Marcus. Nick, thank you for that presentation on the paper, and can I only add, it's a far rosier picture today that we have ahead of us than it was 12 months ago. I know that for a fact. If I could, Nick, obviously we are still working through what is going to become the new norm for the health region. And in particular, I'm enthused really of all the hard efforts that have gone into the recruitment process to date, and it's looking a lot more healthier today than it was 12 months ago, as I said earlier. It is about working with others, rightly so, and it is about getting that communication strategy right, and reducing reliance on emergency departments. I think not just across Royal Glam, but across the region as a whole, Nick. I think this is the time that we should start that communication of engagement about what is likely to be looking at. And I know with the paper you try to cover off as much as you can, and I do appreciate there's a lot of more work to be done. But I do believe that we are working towards a new norm, and I think the way that the health board represents themselves and delivers services is going to be crucial. So I thank you for that. And the question really is, again, Nick, not just for Royal Glam, but we're looking for what we hope are substantial changes across the region for both Prince Charles and Princess of Wales.
Thank you, Phil. So yes, I think the learning from the COVID crisis as to how we deliver emergency care and the opportunities to bring care closer to home are lessons we need to implement across the whole of the health board. I think also the lessons in terms of innovative recruitment and looking at alternative staffing models are not ones just for the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, but our other 2 departments as well. And part of the strength and the sustainability for me is that new working I referred to earlier about the collective support between the 3 departments. So yes, the start of a long journey now to put into place all the actions and all the detail, but it is not just in Rhondda Taff Ely, it is for the whole health board. I agree.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks very much, Phil. Thanks, Nick. Sharon, can I just ask you anything that you wanted to add at this point? Sharon Hopkins, our Chief Exec. Sharon, I think you're on mute.
Right, thank you, Marcus. I was going to wait until others had had a bit of a chance to comment. However, seeing as how you've given me this chance so early on, I'll do that. I won't reiterate everything that Nick has said, but for me, one of the most critical things that we will need to work on and build on now is how we work with the local communities. As Nick has said, the engagement and involvement of our local communities has been really quite phenomenal over the last couple of months. And then during COVID, the experience in accessing services in different ways, particularly for minor illnesses and injuries, and the need to ensure that we can really provide minor illness and injury services outside district hospital environments, and that people are willing to access those in very different ways will be absolutely critical to the sustainability of what we're proposing going forward. The other issues I think we've demonstrated are much more directly within the gift of the board to work on hard, and albeit all of those have still got a way to go, how we work with our communities going forward is critical. And I think we're at the beginning of learning how we do that. And I'm very, very hopeful with the relationships that have been built that we'll really be able to make a success of that co-production, that co-design and different ways of accessing services going forward. But it will be hugely predicated on people learning how to access services in very different ways. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sharon. That's very helpful. I'll come next to Ian Wells, who is one of our independent members. Ian.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're grand.
Yep, great. Okay, thanks, Marcus. I think probably like most people, I'm very happy with the turnaround in the situation, and I'm very pleased really to see the direction that we're going in. I've got a couple of points related to this, and the first one is I'd really like to congratulate the community on the involvement and passion that they've had in this particular subject, and really it's great to see them involved in that way. I'd also like to comment on the fact that the letters that have been received by the board, pretty much all of them are very, very positive about the partnership panel and becoming involved in that. And I think, as we know, there is a certain fragility to the direction we're going in, and the involvement of the community is vital for us to go forward. I note, however, that in the letters, I think most people commented on the contingency plan. And the number of them are a bit nervous about that, and perhaps maybe Nick and a few others can come back on how we maybe can involve the partnership plan in any panel, any contingency plans going forward. I think that would be an interesting thing to look at. In terms of the board going forward, obviously I just mentioned the fragility that we've got, and some of the things that are critical to us continuing in this direction strongly is firstly recruitment. And secondly, the development of local services. As a board, obviously, because of our scrutiny role, I would ask that we can see detailed information on that at all the board meetings, so that we are happy really that the direction that we've chosen to go in is able to continue. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. So those contingency plans, I think, are really important, and we would all want to see that safe care 24/7 in all three of our departments. I think at times when recruitment was its most challenging and staff numbers were really quite poor, and we were using multiple agency doctors on single shift basis, those plans were very unpredictable. And I think already we've made significant progress in ensuring the consistency and the sustainability of the department. But I think it's sensible to have clear thresholds and a clear understanding of safety risks in a way we haven't before, and rather than those being invented sometimes at the very last minute and us behaving in a very responsive way, I think it's far better that we can plan responses in advance. And I'd certainly welcome the opportunity, I'm sure we all would as a board, to engage with the partnership panel and in exploring what those options might be. And I think the most likely one, as I think we've already mentioned in meetings, is short-term diverts of ambulance attendances from one department to another, whilst keeping the front door open to patients walking in. But certainly for me, although one of the key things, as Sharon has emphasised for the partnership panel, is that minor injuries and minor illness, involving that partnership in a very genuine way, not a superficial way, but working with the partnership panel to help express and understand those contingency plans, we'd absolutely welcome. And you're right, Ian, a huge amount of work ahead. We're already developing the response, the medical staffing plans, the models and things, and of course happy to respond to whatever updates the board might want as those are developed and implemented.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ian. And we come next to Dilys Juvenat, another one of our independent members. Dilys.
Thank you, Marcus. A couple of comments from me rather than any questions. I welcome the report today, as I'm sure all the board members do. I would reiterate your thanks to everybody who have put the work in to ensure that this could happen. But I would also like to thank you personally for making sure that the no stone unturned commitment was made at the very beginning to getting a 24/7 service. I welcome the panel. I would suggest that perhaps the third sector should be involved in that. They may have already have procedures in place where they can discuss things with what are known as hard to reach groups. I welcome the panel, I welcome the report, and I would wholeheartedly agree with it. Thank you.
Dilys, thank you very much. Let's move on then to Paul Griffiths, another of our independent members. Paul.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Nick. A couple of questions from me, if I may. First of all, your report is a very different proposition, both in terms of tone and content, to the one we received earlier this year. I think it is very encouraging to see the progress that has been made across a wide range of areas, but particularly in relation to the recruitment of new clinical and nursing staff. However, I recognise that the report is based upon the situation as it is today. When staff move on or retire, as they inevitably will over the coming months and years, do you think we are doing enough to ensure that we don't find ourselves back in the same precarious position as we were 6 months ago? And secondly, is there any opportunity to adopt a less competitive but more strategic and collaborative approach to staff recruitment across South East Wales, so that no health board in this part of Wales is left to face the level of staffing shortfall that we have experienced over recent years? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I think you're right. It would be very easy, and I can assure you that we will not take our eye off the ball, because, as I've said before, this progress hasn't just happened. It's due to a lot of hard work. That is about recruiting differently, recruiting more imaginatively. And whilst there is a long way to go, I'm heartened by the continuing interest in the department. And if the board accept the recommendations today, approve the recommendations today, I think that will give a certainty and a solidity to the department, which will further enhance recruitment. I am heartened by that some of our middle grade doctors are themselves studying to become consultants, to complete their training to become consultants, and have indicated a desire to come to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital as substantive consultants in their own right in the fullness of time. I'm heartened by additional successful recruitment only on Friday of last week. So it's not just one burst of recruitment. There is significant signs for encouragement, and I think that collective working with other health boards is something that has already started and needs to continue. In fact, we've already released one or more, in fact, of our consultants to do some shifts at the trauma unit at University UHB in Cardiff, and I think making our posts attractive will ensure that long-term recruitment, and that cooperation between health boards can only help the sustainability of our medical workforce.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Nick. That's very helpful. We come to Maria Thomas, the Vice Chair of the Health Board next. Maria.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to echo what others have said regarding our thanks to you and to the team for the amount of work that's been put into this, and the data and the information that's been gathered to give us the evidence to make a decision here today, because I think that was needed, and I'm grateful to receive that. Just one question from me, Nick, and that's regarding the reporting for the future in relationship to the safety and the risks within the 3 departments. Is it your intention that you will give us that assurance via the Quality and Safety Committee?
Very happy to be guided by yourself and other members of the board as to where the various reports come. I was presuming that the board would want an update regularly for the next few months as to how progress was taking shape in terms of implementation. But for me, we do need to normalise, if you like, the emergency departments within the health board's governance structure, and examining any concerns about safety, examine any risks to our staffing would, as you quite rightly say, report through to the Quality and Safety Committee. And perhaps part of the work we need to do is to identify earlier indicators of concern, so we can be alert and respond much more quickly than perhaps we've seen at times over the last 6 years.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We come next to Jane Sadgrove. Jane, another of our independent members. Jane.
Thank you, Marcus. I too would want to add my thanks and appreciation to the team for the work that they've put into developing this proposition, and to our communities whose passion for the services that we deliver was so evident to us. You talked a lot, Nick, about the success in recruitment of people. I'd just like to explore whether the culture has sufficiently changed. And I'd like to just read a brief section from the Health Inspectorate Wales and Wales Audit Office report on our quality governance, which was published in November 2019, which is only 8 months ago. And they said at that stage, and this is, you know, experts from outside looking in at us and in at our services, they said that the review team found examples of normalisation or acceptance of working with high levels of risk, and during our work we needed to raise immediate cause for concern in relation to this within the emergency departments at both Prince Charles Hospital and Royal Glamorgan Hospital. So what I'm looking for is an assurance really that we've moved away from that acceptance of unacceptable levels of risk and safety to the people, the patients that we're looking after, and that we are now actually realistically confident that we are able to make sure that that service is safe, because that's what we all want it to be. We want it to be there and we want it to be safe.
Thank you, Jane. Culture is so important, but it's so hard to measure, isn't it? And I suppose if you ask for an absolute assurance, Jane, it's probably very difficult to give that, particularly after what's a relatively short period of time. But I suppose you know, here I feel accountable to my own professional standards and my own responsibilities. So was I very concerned on a day-to-day basis about safety in the department? Yes, I was. Was I very concerned about the team working? Despite the fantastic efforts of individuals within the teams, was I concerned on a day-to-day basis that there was risk to patients because of the difficulties of that team working when there were multiple short-term doctors there? Yes, I was. Am I concerned now? Not so much. There's a tangible difference in the department when you walk in there, and that is due to the consistent long-term fantastic nurse leadership, the new resource and some of the new characters in medical leadership, which really are making a difference. And it's not just me saying so, it is, I think I briefly referred to it earlier, when I talk to nurses and to doctors from other departments, them saying it just feels different. We recognise the team's referrals are more effective, we're getting better handovers. So I'm sure there's more work to do. I'm sure, as in any department, things can be further improved, but it feels so much better, and I just want to thank the teams for that.
Good. Thank you very much, Nick. We'll come to Nicola Milligan next, another of our independent members. Nicola.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Nick. It's quite clear how much hard work has gone into this by both the Health Board and our communities. I just wanted to raise, I'm really glad to see in the plan that we've built in development and progression of our staff, which I think this is going to go not only a long way into recruiting, but retention of staff, which we all know we've had an issue with in the past. But my question was, and Ian has already touched on it briefly, is in the letters that we've had in from the public, they are clearly saying they've got some concerns around the bullet point regarding our contingency plans. And I think just as a point of clarity, I think our contingency plans are long term, if I'm not mistaken, Nick, but it's to deal with short term staffing problems. But I don't think our contingency plans are short term.
Thanks, Nicola. Apologies for any ambiguity either in what I've said or for in the paper. It feels to me that the ED department, particularly at the Royal Glamorgan, we have been very reactive. We've dealt with issues in staffing, sometimes at the last minute, because that's not a criticism of that. That was the way it had to be. As in any of the services within our health board, I think I'm asking that the board to support the production of absolutely clear contingency plans if there are safety concerns in any of our three ED departments, so that staff that are on call, so that clinical teams have already rehearsed in their minds what we do, at what level and threshold we do, how nursing staff and medical staff can work together potentially differently, how we can work with colleagues in the ambulance service in order to ensure that patients are seen in the right place. So we have contingency plans for most of our clinical services. So yes, the contingency plans are long term, but my expectation is that as we further improve our staffing levels, as those teams coalesce together and the departments support each other better, that actually the need for those contingency plans significantly reduces, and they are built on the premises that it would be on a single night or a single day basis, not for longer periods of time.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola. Mel J, who will come to you next? Mel, another of our independent members.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Nick, thank you for that report. And my views totally reflect everything that's been said about the great work that's gone on both internally and externally with the communities and all our partners and get us to where we are today. It's very heartening, and it's been a good piece of work. But as a community member living in Rhondda Cynon Taf, and obviously within the Cwmtaf Morgannwg Health Board, if I was sitting here and listening to this now and reading the report, and I'd be looking at that partnership panel which you referred to in the report, we've mentioned it a couple of times, they'd be saying, well, when is it going to take place? How will it be established? So what I'd like, if you could possibly just put some meat on the bones of how the panel is going to take shape and perhaps some of the work that it'll entail in the journey that it's going to take forward.
Thanks, Mel, and I'm not going to give all the detail you're probably looking for, because I think we need part of the answer to your question is that we work with others for that design. So have I got a detailed design in my back pocket that tells you what this is going to look like? No, I haven't. What we are doing is looking across the UK and across Wales to where similar partnership panels have been developed that actually work. I think we'd all recognise that sometimes within the NHS, these partnership panels are nominal or superficial and not true partnerships. What we want to do is to draw from best practice elsewhere in the UK as well as locally as to how we can build this partnership panel most effectively, how we can ensure that people feel represented on it, how it is representative of the community and how it can work effectively. So assuming that the board, or hoping that the board approves today's recommendations, that is one of the early next pieces of work to go out there with the many people we've met in the last few months of engagement with national best practice and take forward that partnership panel and get it working as soon as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mel. That's grand. And then we come next to Greg Dix, our Executive Director of Nursing and Midwifery and Patient Experience. Greg.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Nick, thank you for the paper. I'm really encouraged to see a work stream that will maximise the nursing contribution to emergency care going forward. And we are engaging currently with our educational commissioners in relation to a pipeline for future AMP workforce. So we've had some very good support from HEIW. I guess, Nick, my question's in relation to our emergency nurse practitioner workforce, which I don't see particularly detailed in the paper, and as you know, are really fundamental to the delivery of both our minor injury and minor illness pathways, both within our emergency unit and equally our MAUs. So the first question is in relation to have our ENPs been considered in the wider workforce plan? And final comment, really, I am really encouraged to see the ambition of non-medical consultants within emergency care, and it would be great to have this used as an exemplar for the rest of the organisation. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Greg. I think you and I think as one on this, that we really need to use this as an opportunity to look at our staffing models, probably not just using doctors and nurses, but also the role of therapists. We've seen for a long time the successful use of musculoskeletal therapists at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, and I think we also need to learn from that. I think as you'd all recognise that although the focus has been on medical staffing issues, there are not hundreds of senior nurse consultants or experienced EMPs or AMPs out there, and I think we'd also recognise, the detailed conversations that now need to happen as to what we would aspire for our models of staffing, nursing, medical, and therapy, and then how we implement that in a timely way in order not to affect the sustainability or delivery of any other services within our health board. So a shed load, for want of a more technical term, of work to be done, and a lot I'm looking forward to. Actually, we're all looking forward to those conversations.
Greg, just before you go, could I just ask a couple of bits of jargon? If you could just explain ENPs and ANPs, just explain for everybody's benefit what they are.
Yes, of course, Chair. So ENPs are emergency nurse practitioners and primarily work within the minor streams of emergency care, so minor injury and elements of minor illness. And ANPs are advanced nurse practitioners, so have a more extensive training in emergency care and medicine, and generally will work from a medical rota, so a junior or middle grade medical rota, and would probably or more likely care for patients that will have more major conditions than minor conditions.
Thanks, Greg, and fantastic examples of developing roles and the blurring of boundaries even between the professions. Thank you very much. Can I then next come to Claire Williams, who is our Interim Director of Planning Performance? Claire.
Thanks, Marcus. Not so much a question from myself, but I just wanted to acknowledge the huge engagement and participation that has been undertaken through this process, and the support in a very constructive way that the CHC have provided us through this process. They have been very supportive in ensuring that we have gathered the voice of our public, and in terms of developing our partnership panel, I think that they will play a very supportive role in ensuring that the voice of the public is heard. So I just really wanted to take the opportunity to thank them for being incredibly constructive through this period.
Thanks, Claire. That's very helpful. Colleagues, I'm just checking the sidebar to see whether anybody else has any questions. I think pretty much all of the independent members have asked questions, and that's really helpful. I can't see anybody else waiting to come in, so we're moving now to the decision moment. Just before we do that, I again just personally wanted to pay tribute to everybody who's been involved in this. This is really a transformation, I think. For 5 or 6 years, a shadow has hung over the department in the Royal Glamorgan Hospital after the South Wales programme delivered its verdict. And what we're moving towards now, I think, is starting to feel like a new chapter in the life of the hospital, which is excellent. But there's a huge responsibility on us all as a board in making this decision in a minute, because clearly we must not fall into a situation where we give people false hope. We must only move in the direction as proposed in the paper if we genuinely believe that that is deliverable and will deliver the outcomes that we want. And in the recommendations are some really significant asks, things that have yet to be delivered and must be delivered if it's to be successful. Not least of which is, as many colleagues have suggested, the partnership panel with the community, a crucial area that we need to develop. And also, secondly, lots and lots of hard work still going on in the department with staffing. And on that, it was really encouraging at the end of last week to be chairing the interview panel for some new consultants. And it was just marvellous to hear the enthusiasm of some of the brightest and best doctors who are choosing to come to Cwmtaf Morgannwg because they see a bright future, a professionally rewarding future. So absolutely delighting and really encouraging actually last week to see yet more doctors choosing to come to us. So really encouraging. So colleagues, we are asked then in the paper to approve. There are six particular bullet points there. I won't read them all out to you because you've read them. Can I ask you, therefore, are you happy to approve the recommendations as contained in the paper?
Happy to approve.
Yes, happy to approve.
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 Super. I won't go round everybody because we'll still be here later on in the day. But I'm taking that from the fact that a number of people have said yes, and I'm looking at the comments on the right-hand side, and nobody is demurring. So we are, I think, as a board, very happy to approve those recommendations. We move forward now into a new chapter, and hopefully a much brighter and more positive future for not only the ED department at Royal Glamorgan, but of course the whole hospital. But that's not to discount the fact that a lot of work still needs to be done, and the board will wish, I'm sure, to keep a very close eye on the progress that's being made to make sure that we are moving forward in all respects, and that we can be confident that the plan as set out in the paper actually is being delivered to time and sustainably. So again, thank you very much, Nick, to you and to the whole team, everybody who's been involved in this. We've come an enormous way in the last 6 months, and I think we can all now allow ourselves to be cautiously optimistic about a situation that was looking grim at the turn of the last year. So thank you all very much indeed. Colleagues, we'll move on then. Thank you very much for that, to the next item on the agenda, 4.2, which is the Health Board's Test, Trace, Protect programme, an absolutely critical element of the by no means yet finished battle with COVID-19 and its fearful potential consequences for our communities. And I'm delighted to hand over to Professor Kelechi Nyoam, our Director of Public Health, to present this paper. Thanks, Kelechi.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it is common consensus now that the lockdown that the country went into sometime around the 23rd of March went a long way to keep as low as possible the amount of infections with COVID-19 in the community. As we approach the gradual easing of the lockdown, there is the sense that COVID-19 has not quite left our communities, and therefore the nature of the easing of lockdown that we get or put in place will determine, first of all, what kind of second peak we get if we do get a second peak, and as a result of that, putting in place procedures and systems to make sure that we are able to keep new infections or a resurgence of COVID-19 as low as possible is a matter of strategic importance to Wales as a whole. And this is the key reason the Test, Trace and Protect program has been put in place to enable us, when we come out of the lockdown, to keep the new infections and obviously the consequences of new infections as manageable as possible. So the purpose of the Test, Trace and Protect program is simply to put in place the systems and the processes that will enable us as a country to come out of the lockdown in a way that also allows us to keep a control on COVID-19. Now, there is a national framework for the Test, Trace and Protect program, which I will describe in a moment. But Cwmtaf Morgannwg, like other regions, has set up the Test, Trace and Protect program consistent with the national framework. There are 4 work streams within this program. The first, as the name suggests, is COVID-19 testing. The second is about contact tracing. The third is about surveillance. And the fourth is about communications. Now, there is a protect function that currently functions on a national basis, but we are also looking to set up a regional work stream consistent with that national protect framework. In a moment, I'll just describe very quickly the key aims of each of those 4 work streams. As the name suggests, testing is simply about putting in a coherent and comprehensive system to provide antigen testing and antibody testing to our population. Quite simply, antigen testing simply answers the question of, have I got COVID-19? Whereas antibody testing simply answers the question of, have I ever been exposed to COVID-19? So completely different purposes. So the test function is putting in place those 2 elements of testing. The contact tracing is crucial. And this program may not have referred earlier, but very clear in the documents, hopefully, is a multi-agency program. So this isn't just about the health board. It's the health board, our 3 local authority partners, working hand in hand to put this program in place. So the contact tracing element of the program is essentially making sure that at a local level, there are people who are doing contact tracing. Currently, we are doing contact tracing in the national framework on the basis of positive tests rather than on the basis of the emergence of symptoms. It is the plan nationally at some point in time to go to a system of contact tracing that is based on the identification of symptoms rather than waiting for a confirmed test. I want to use this opportunity to just recognize the incredible effort that our local authorities have put in place, because currently the contact tracing staffing is largely drawn from local authorities. And like I said, it's been an incredible multi-partner effort. So contact tracing is also a key element of our Test, Trace and Protect program. The third element of our Test, Trace and Protect program is this system of surveillance. And surveillance is crucial because that allows us to see very early what the virus is doing as we come out of lockdown, and then being able to respond to that real time. So it's use of information and intelligence to know exactly how to direct action based on what we understand the virus to be doing. And the last element is about risk communication and community engagement. As the name suggests, is really engaging with our communities, understanding how they are perceiving the risk of COVID-19, understanding what they are thinking, and then being able to respond with that intelligence. So those are the key 4 work streams, and in the papers with the board today are the specific operational plans for each of those work streams. Now, the key work stream and then the other things that are in the documents just is setting out the strategy and the overall plan for the TTP program, and which I'm asking the board to approve today, and setting out the governance. As I said earlier, it's a multi-partner effort, but the governance of the program, the TTP program, is also included in the papers. There are just 2 other elements that I would like to draw key attention to of the board to. And contact tracing, as I said earlier, is currently, although this is a multi-partner system, the contact tracing element is largely run by the local authorities within the program framework, in the same way that the testing element is largely run by the health board within that partnership element. So the papers that are here for the board to approve include the workforce and financial document that essentially sets out the financial and workforce plan for the entire program. As far as the health board is concerned, the key element that I would like to draw attention to is around the financial and workforce implications of the testing program. I did say earlier that it's largely around antigen and antibody testing, and in the demand and capacity modules that we've included in the papers, we've set out how we've arrived at those workforce implications or workforce requirements and the finances associated with them. The only other thing I would like to say is that we recognize that the Welsh government has been very supportive in terms of signaling a desire to support health boards and TTP programs, regional TTP programs financially in relation to the costs of contact tracing particularly, but also in relation to the cost of the other elements of the TTP program. And they have asked for a workforce and financial returns to be made. We are continue to work on the workforce and financial returns. So part of the papers that are here for approval today will be asking that if the board is happy to approve, particularly the Cwmtaf Morgannwg Health Board element of the costs, then we will take account of that in continuing to engage with the Welsh government to make that financial return to the Welsh government. I do have to say that hopefully everyone is quite excited on how complex the setting in which we're operating. The policy on national policy on testing is changing from time to time, and each time it changes, we do have to respond to some of those changes. But not just that national context, sometimes we have to deal with outbreaks, and I think the board is cited on some of the incidents or clusters that we may be dealing with at this particular point. We have got to be able to put in place a mechanism that allows us to respond to the emergence of clusters as we're currently having to deal with. And that is one of the key reasons why we've got to put in a solid plan, as you have before you, to be able to put in testing into our communities as the need may be. So the ask of the board today is to note the progress that we've made on the Test, Trace and Protect program, to approve the strategic plan, the work stream plans and the oversight arrangements for the program, and then to approve the workforce and financial plan to draw specific attention to the £10.7 million for the health board in relation to the overall TTP program, and to approve that whilst we continue to refine the workforce and the financial implications of this, that we continue to liaise with the Welsh government in terms of securing firm support for the program as a whole. Chair, I will stop there and I'll take any comments or questions. Thank you.
Kelechi, thank you very much for that. Another area of huge work that the teams have been doing over the last few months, quite unprecedented really. I don't think we've ever had to cope with something on this scale so quickly, working across organisations and against real time pressures. So it's a fantastic effort by all concerned. And the plan which you presented for us today is an absolutely crucial part, isn't it, of getting out of this catastrophic situation that we're in at the moment, with the economy buckling and all sorts of social and other implications for our communities. This is a crucial element of the exit route from this awful situation that we're currently in. So thank you very much. A number of colleagues are wanting to make contributions. Sharon, we'll come to you first.
Thank you, Chair. Kelechi, thank you for presenting that so comprehensively. I just wanted to raise the issue of this being a truly integrated partnership programme, and as you say, Chair, at a scale that we haven't had to do before, and I think is also a fantastic learning opportunity for the organisation to understand more about what goes on outside the hospital walls. Now, as a former public health practitioner, you'll understand that I never waste an opportunity of talking about the wider population and community piece, but this work that the teams have been doing under the leadership of Kelechi and with colleagues in the local authorities has been on a similar scale to the sort of work that we were doing on making a field hospital become a reality, doubling and quadrupling the intensive care capacity. Now, those two things much more easily understood and much more visible and tangible. The teams have had to respond to policy changes almost on a daily basis that haven't just been small issues, but have required the teams then to work in a completely different way, or indeed suddenly find that they've got to provide a service for hundreds and hundreds of people in the community. And an example of this was just at the weekend. On Saturday, teams are working overnight to enable 880 people to be tested up in Merthyr, in Kovach, in order for us to secure that it was indeed an incident and not an outbreak out there. And that was a phenomenal piece of work, with that number of people being tested. The labs in partnership turned around the tests within 24 hours, enabling the teams then to go on to the next phase of work. So I think the flexibility and responsiveness, the scale and the integrated partnership working shouldn't be underestimated here. And I just want to extend my thanks to all of the teams working on this. And hopefully the plans you've got in front of you, with some of the traditional numbers in terms of workforce numbers and money, will give you a touch point for the sort of scale of operation that the teams are working on here for us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sharon. Steve Webster, we come to you next, Finance Director.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm not sure my camera is working because I can't see it, but hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you, Steve, yeah.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to stress two things, really. I mean, one is there is further work to go in refining and developing this plan, but it is a very joined up plan. And I think we've got, relative to other health boards, I think we do have a very well developed plan, you know, that is joined up across its different aspects and is linked in with our resetting plan. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would just stress is the last recommendation around, I think I would strengthen it to seeking formal approval and funding of this plan. The Welsh Government have seen various iterations of the plan. This is a further iteration, but it's really important that we join up policy and planning decisions like this with the funding arrangements from Welsh Government. This is quite a substantial cost for the Health Board as well as for partners, around £10 million. So getting that case into Welsh Government and very actively seeking funding, I think, is an important part. It links in very much to the accountability and governance arrangements paper we've got later on the agenda, but so absolutely support the paper and would just stress the importance of that final recommendation and going into the Welsh Government.
Thanks, Steve. That's very helpful. Come next to Jane Sadgrove, one of our independent members. Jane.
Thank you, Marcus. And I would want to echo the appreciation for the mammoth amount of work that's gone into creating from nothing this system, which is actually working well within Cwm Taf Morgannwg. I had one specific question, Kelechi, which has actually been flagged, I think, by you in reports to the board and committees during the course of the pandemics, and that's the need for the underpinning national case management system and other IT systems to actually really make it feasible to do the mammoth amount of work and make the connections that are necessary and analyse the data so that we can protect our populations more. I can see that in the draft strategy, it's still an intention to develop the case management system. Could you give us some indications about progress on that?
Thank you, Jane. The case management system went live actually on the 8th of June, and so it is very much in use. Understandably, it has had teething problems, but I think we have walked through a lot of those problems. It is not 100% perfect as yet, but it's giving us everything, mostly everything we want. We're able to get data from it. Most importantly, even when it had its teething problems, because we had a local backup system, we were able to do the fundamental public health preventative work, even though the CRM was still getting up to speed. So So the CRM is in place, it is working, it still has just a few teething problems that we're working through. But the important thing to say is that none of that has stopped us from doing the important public health work, which our local authority colleagues have been incredible in supporting in that space.
Great, thanks, Kelechi. I think, colleagues, that covers the questions that people have asked to raise. So the paper asks us to do 4 things: to note the progress, to approve the latest draft strategic plan, to approve the latest workforce and financial plan, and then finally to approve that whilst work continues, that liaison, and Steve particularly emphasised this, liaison continues with Welsh Government on support for funding. So can I ask colleagues, are you happy to note that and to approve the other 3 items? I'll take silence as assent rather than get everybody to say yay or nay, and I'll just pause for a second just to give people a chance to register any disagreement. Good. Okay, thank you very much then, and thank you, Kelechi, for that paper, and best of luck with the work that's continuing. Thank you.
Thank you.
We move on then, colleagues, to item 5 on the agenda, which is resetting the Health Board's operating framework and a proposal around governance and assurance. And I hand over to George Gilletley, who is our now confirmed Director of Corporate Governance and Board Secretary. George.
Thank you, Marcus. So the board will be aware that when COVID first came about back in March, the board looked at amending the decision-making arrangements to make sure that we could respond to emergency situation. We're now in a sort of second phase now, which is resetting CTM operating framework, which the board approved at its meeting on the 28th of May. So again, we need to look at the decision making to support what we're doing in order to make sure that we've got good assurances and delivery around the quality of decision making in that operating framework. The approach that this paper outlines utilises the learning and experience of the agile decision making that we saw and experienced around COVID, and it sets out how the board could make decisions and receive assurances whilst making sure that we retain that agility. So the mechanism really demonstrates risk-based decision making, takes account of quality, activity and resources, and the paper is split into 2 areas. First of all, governance on the management and delivery of the framework, and then the second around how the board will gain its assurances. So the first element, you'll see that we've set up a resetting management team that Sharon as Chief Executive chairs. And it's widely acknowledged that the gold, silver, bronze arrangement and the command structure decision-making framework that we put in place was really well received. So you'll see at the Appendix 1, we've adjusted that slightly to make it relevant to the new operating framework, but using the same fundamental justification, really. There's also Appendix 2, the business justification, a decision justification that we've outlined. So that really is to make sure that whatever decisions are put to the resetting team are clearly laid out as thinking that's gone behind that, making sure that all of the finances, all of the quality implications are taken into account so that decisions can be looked back and made sure that we have a good audit process, and also for you as a board can see the assurances that are gained as a result of that. The only other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to is around the change in the revenue limit for the Chief Executive. So we're suggesting there that there's a £500,000 limit that the board approve. And then I'll move on to, I can pause there, I can move on to the second section, which is how the board receives assurances. So shall I stop at that point and see if there's any questions? Okay, I can see there are no questions, so I will carry on to the second part of the paper, which is around the board assurance mechanism. You'll see that I've outlined 3 options in relation to how the board can gain the assurance through this new mechanism, and the proposal is for option 3, which in effect means that the board will now meet monthly to have collective oversight of all the aspects of the delivery of the framework. We'll also suggest meeting with all of the committees up and running, but maybe at slightly less frequent intervals, with the exception of the Quality and Safety Committee and the Audit and Risk Committee, which will continue to meet bi-monthly to make sure that those 2 areas have the detailed scrutiny that are required. So on that basis, Marcus, I would propose that the board approve option 3. I'm happy to take any questions. I suppose the last thing I would say before handing back would be that monthly board meetings may seem slightly more than the bi-monthly meetings we have now, but what I'm suggesting is that we stick to the core business of the board every other month, and then the intervening months we focus on the resetting agenda. So happy to take any questions.
Gran, thanks very much, George. I've had a slight technical glitch, so my computer's packed up, but I've had to move to Sharon's now, so ignore the caption in the corner, it is really me. So colleagues, George, thank you very much for that presentation. Colleagues, any particular questions or points anybody wishes to raise on this paper? George, can I just ask you, whilst colleagues are just thinking about this, just to clarify then, so one of the key issues for us is to be agile but to be accountable, isn't it? It's the sort of classic conundrum. Just explain to us, how are we achieving that balance, do you think? And what particularly would you highlight as any risks involved in what you're asking us to approve?
So I do believe we are achieving it. I think we're in the early stages, and I think we, as with anything, would need to learn as we go along. So this proposal, the decision justification, for example, can't be seen as an extra thing to do on top of papers for meetings. So my proposal is that we use that as a basis for papers for meetings, and that forms the basis of a decision. So I think there's going to be new ways of working to make sure that we are agile, as I say, continually learning as we go along. And the only thing I would say we do need to keep an eye on is how the board continue to receive their assurance, and where we need to ask the board for approval of things. So if we're saying that there's a £500,000 limit being implemented for the chief executive, we don't want that to become an extra burden for the board, whilst ensuring the board maintain that overall connectivity and oversight. So I think we'll just have to watch and see, but I am minded that this is a more agile approach. So yeah, I'd welcome comments from colleagues on that, actually, because clearly we need to make sure everybody's content that it's agile but robust.
Super. Thanks very much, George. That's grand. Maria, you wanted to come in, Maria Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to say that we have had the opportunity and commented quite a number of the independent members on the draft of this paper, and thank you for that, George, because it was very helpful at the time, which has brought together, I think, the outcome of the options, and quite happy to support option 3. But it was a good way of asking the questions prior to this this paper coming to board as well, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Maria. That's very helpful. Any other comments or questions from any colleagues on the board before we discuss what it is that we're asked to approve? Nobody's. Yeah, Phil. Yes. Yes.
Sorry, Marcus. Sorry.
That's okay.
If I can ask George, 2.2.2. New ways of working, and we've got in there. It's likely that the executives will be interacting with the IMs more regularly on the one. But should it be changed from likely to we will be? Sorry, are we moving towards it? I'm only asking the question. If it is likely, when is that going to be?
Yeah, so Phil, I sent out an email week before last asking independent members for some views on how you can gain better assurance during these very strange times. Yeah. One of them was that suggestion, so I'd be very grateful to receive any views on the proposals that I put forward, and I'll work with the executives to make sure that we link in and provide that assurances for you. So yes, it's likely, well, yes, it will happen if you're in support of those proposals, Phil.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, Phil. We come next to Mel J. one of our independent members. Mel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, George, for that report. I just want to make a comment in my role as Chair of the Performance Planning and Finance Committee, which will be at the heart of looking at many of these issues. And I just think it makes a lot of sense. It gives the executives a little bit of time to actually do what they need to do without over scrutiny. And I really mean that in the best possible way. But it allows us to see a flow and for there to be continuity with the board. So it has my full support.
Thanks very much, Mel. And Steve Webster, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to stress really that link with the Welsh Government being important now, because we're going to have a number of individual areas of investment around resetting in COVID, and we've just had quite a substantial one, which the board needs to consider, but clearly to finance those schemes, we are going to be reliant on Welsh Government funding. So the loop going into Welsh Government to get feedback from Welsh Government, around approving those things and ideally funding those things, and that happening in a reasonably timely way, I think is the next stage of this, and clearly that can't just happen within the health board itself. That requires the Welsh Government to work in that way too. So I think there's a sort of challenge for all of us really in making this effective.
Good. Thanks very much, Steve. I don't think any other colleagues are raising any issues. So colleagues, what we're asked to do is to approve the governance and decision-making approach outlined in the paper, and to approve the proposals for governance decision-making and option 3 in the board assurance mechanism. As before, can I ask anybody who disagrees or isn't happy to approve that, if they could just indicate that now? If you don't, I will assume that you are happy to accept the recommendations. I'll just pause for a minute just to give everybody a chance to register their views if they're not content. Good. OK, I'm taking that as approval. Thank you, George. Thank you very much. Very helpful paper taking us forward. Good. Thank you. Colleagues, then we move on. Item 6 on the agenda is the Integrated Governance and Accountability Report. I think, George, are you going to go first on this?
I can do, Marcus, certainly, yes. So we met earlier this morning as an audit committee to sign off the annual accounts and the accountability report. I will take no claim over the annual accounts. I will leave that to my colleague Steve, but certainly the accountability report will be put in front of the board this morning, along with the accounts asking for board approval. They received scrutiny this morning. We were joined by external auditors from Audit Wales and the independent members of the audit committee. So I won't say anything further. They've been out for full draft consultation with auditors and internally within the organisation and with independent members. So happy again to take any questions, but just want to emphasise they've been fully scrutinised this morning by audit committee.
George, thank you very much for that. We move then. Do we, Steve? Are you going to talk us into the next item?
So I can cover the CUMTAF annual accounts at 6.2. So if I just cover first the covering report, this focuses on the changes between the draft accounts and the final accounts, and that's because the board has had circulated previously the draft accounts with a full explanation, and there were a number of questions which we've answered. So this report here focuses on the changes between the draft accounts and the final accounts. There are two key changes as set out in that report. The first is that primary care prescribing costs were higher in March than in the draft accounts. This was a known factor due to COVID, but the timing of receiving information on primary care prescribing is that there is a delay of almost 2 months. So at the time of the draft accounts, we weren't able to have the exact figure for that month 12 prescribing costs. We had already agreed that we would handle in that way with Audit Wales colleagues and with Welsh Government, and that Welsh Government would fund the increase that we knew there would be. So that increase is 1.278 million, and that is funded by Welsh Government, so that is neutral to the overall position. So that's the first change. The second change is that following review of the draft accounts by Audit Wales, there are some accruals, that's sums provided in the accounts for monies owing to external parties. Some of those accruals have been sort of changed and reduced, so that we've agreed to reduce our accruals by 793,000, which then has the effect of increasing the Health Board's surplus against the Welsh Government allocation by the same amount, 793k, and that changes our surplus from 90 to 883k. So that's the second change. I think those are the two key points in terms of the covering report. If I could just turn to the main accounts themselves. I won't go into these in any detail, as I say, because we have had a detailed report on them previously. But the one thing that really lies throughout all the accounts, and you can see it from the year-on-year comparisons, is Cwmtaf Meganeg in 1920 is very much larger than the former Cwmtaf in 2018-19. The scale of the change is 55% on average, so different numbers change by different percentages, but overall the turnover and the net operating cost of the organisations increased by 55%, which is, it's not all to do with the Bridgend transfer, there are other changes as well, but that's clearly a very significant change in the scale of the organisation, so I would just flag that. I do have one other point to make around correcting an error that we picked up since the audit committee, and I'm grateful to a member of my staff that picked this up. It doesn't affect the surplus or anything like that, but if I could just direct you to page 3, which is the statement of comprehensive net expenditure, the adjustment then for revaluations, the figure that's shown as 4024 should have shown as minus 4024, and that changes the total to 1062962. So I would just ask the board to note that, and my apologies that we didn't pick this up earlier, but it's important that we do correct it. As I say, it has no bearing on the overall surplus of the organisation, but I would ask the board to note that. So thank you, Chair. That's all I had to say.
Thanks, Steve. That's very helpful indeed. We'll come back to these items in terms of approval, because we need to approve them before we finish today. Is there anything to be said on the WISC and the EASC final accounts in particular?
No, Marcus, I think it was discussed at Audit Committee this morning, where we did have representatives from both organisations, and Audit Committee were happy to endorse those accounts for board approval this morning, so we felt they weren't required to attend.
Super, thanks. Okay, then, so we'll come back to the approval of the necessary items. But Paul Griffiths, so Paul, you're independent member, chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, a key element in all this, and we're very grateful to the work of the committee on behalf of the board in everything you've been doing over the last few weeks in this regard and the detailed scrutiny. Paul, is there anything that you wanted to draw to the board's attention at this point?
Thank you, Marcus. I think George and Steve has probably covered most of the issues I'd want to address. I think all I need to do really is just confirm that the Audit and Risk Committee met this morning to consider the final accounts, the accountability report, and the Audit Wales final report. And as a result of the very rigorous scrutiny process that we've gone through in recent weeks, and having had the benefit of reading the external audit report as well, I think the Audit and Risk Committee were very happy and content to be able to endorse their approval for the board to sign off the accounts for 2019-20. As I say, it was a rigorous process, and it's as rigorous process as I've come across in several years. I don't know whether it's because of the complexity this year, but I think a lot of us have been kept very busy for several weeks now. But at last we've reached the stage where I think we are content for the board to sign off the accounts.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks,
you.
Paul. That's really helpful. Great. And the final item on this was the audit of the financial statements and the report back from Audit Wales. Is there any colleagues want to make any particular comments around that item?
Chair, perhaps I could just say a word or two about that, given that we had the representatives from Audit Wales at the meeting this morning. I think they emphasised that at some length that this was a clean opinion, which is always nice to receive. And although it's entitled an emphasis of matter, that is still considered to be a clean opinion. So I think that's just the one point that board members need to understand.
And a crucial fact. Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. That's great. So, colleagues, we'll come back to the necessary approvals on all of these items in a second. But are there any points anybody wishes to raise on any of these items under number 6? Now's your chance to raise anything that you wish to do so. Again, I'll just pause just to give people a chance to indicate if they wish to come in. And nobody is, so that's very helpful. So let's go back then to 6.1, the accountability report. Are we content, colleagues, to approve the recommendations as outlined in the report? Again, I will take silence as assent, because otherwise it isn't practical. But again, I'll just pause in case anybody wishes to raise anything there. And nobody is. So we move on to 6.2, the financial accounts. Are we happy to approve the recommendations contained in that report? Again, I'll pause. If anybody has any concerns, please raise them now. And again, nobody has, so I'm taking that as assent. George, just advise me, is there anything else under this item 6 that we need to get the board's approval of, or has that covered it?
No, you've covered it nicely there, Marcus. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the team. As Paul said, again, a huge amount of work has gone into this behind the scenes. It's not particularly celebrated, is it? But it's absolutely crucial to the smooth functioning of the organisation. So a genuine thanks to everybody involved in that, including the team from Audit Wales. So colleagues, we come then to the final item 7, which is any other urgent business, and there's one item that that I want to raise just on this. Nobody else has approached me with any items, so I think this is the only one. And it's to go back to the point that I made in my opening remarks at the beginning of the meeting. The impact of COVID-19 on our communities, on our staff, has been horrible. And there are many people whose lives have been cut short because of this awful disease. And we became aware, didn't we, during the course of the progression of the disease, that some particular parts of our community and of our staff were significantly more affected by the disease than others, for reasons which I think are probably still largely unknown, but the reality is there. And the fear and concern that that is bound to generate is really a really serious concern for us. So as an employer, as a health board providing care for the population, we need to take very seriously the particular risk which our Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues on the staff and our communities face. So I thought it would just be useful for colleagues just to have from Howell, Daniel, just a quick update on what we're doing, particularly in regard to how we're addressing the particular needs, fears and challenges of our BAME colleagues on the staff. Howell.
Thanks, Marcus. Hopefully you can all hear me. So you may not have all seen this yet, but connected to what Marcus has just said, we've actually shared with you on IBABS the First Minister's report on this particular issue. So back along when this became when it became apparent that there appeared at least to be a disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on BAME members of the public and indeed members of staff. The First Minister commissioned a piece of work and a subgroup, an advisory group, to advise him and his cabinet on this critical issue and to identify any immediate measures that might be taken to mitigate the impact. The report itself has got a very broad focus, and there are parts of that work that are still ongoing, which have been commissioned by the First Minister and the Health Minister, and the report details those. You may not have seen that thus far because it was a little bit hidden on IBABS, but it's under the personal documents section, and there's a BAME section, so you'll be able to have a look at that report. It's about 30 pages long, but it's got some good information in there about some of the wider socio-demographic issues connected with this particular matter. But in relation to staff, which is the element that I've been heavily involved in, the predominant activity really that we've undertaken has been around the risk assessment that was developed as part of this work. So the subgroup that I mentioned earlier, with clinical representation from Public Health Wales, actually developed a specific risk assessment for BAME workers with us, and that includes employees and any other workers we might engage, for example, agency workers. And that has specifically been developed to assess the impact in clinical areas, and obviously then to take any actions to mitigate that. And that's been a huge piece of work for us. As well as that, we discovered that there was a bunch of our staff for whom we didn't have data actually on whether they were from a BAME background in terms of ethnicity or not, and this has been an opportunity for us to gather that data, and we've actually been quite successful in now gathering that data for almost all of our workforce, which has been really positive, and we're near enough approximately 800 to 900 staff who fall within this group, so it's a significant issue for us, particularly as I said, in clinical areas. One other just piece of work to mention there is around this has been around development of our BAME staff network. because again, as part of this work, we really felt that we could do better in terms of having direct conversations with BAME staff about how issues such as this might affect them. And that's been a key piece of work for us. So that really enables us to have more direct conversations about pieces of work such as this with this particular group of staff. But we haven't managed to get through all of the risk assessments yet. There's a few still to complete, but the take up on that has been very high. And as the evidence emerges, we're continuing to work with Welsh Government and Public Health Wales to adapt then the risk assessment and indeed the mitigations we put in place. And that's all I plan to say on that, Marcus.
Hal, thanks very much for that. I thought, colleagues, you would appreciate hearing that. You know, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to our staff, and we will continue to do so because this isn't over yet. And none more so than our BAME staff, who I know are feeling particularly exposed in the current situation. So it's good to hear what we're doing to support them in this really difficult time. So, colleagues, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. Our next meeting is on the 30th of July, as you know. Can I thank you all for the contributions? And I think we've more or less survived the challenges of the technology. I've destroyed one computer in the process, but hey, I've found another one, so it can't be that bad. Colleagues, thank you all very much, and go safe. Thank you.